Now, who out of you lot would like to be a millionaire? Easy question, really, isn't it? All of you, probably. But what are the lengths that you would be willing to go to in order to become a millionaire? Would you lie? Would you cheat? Would you steal? And would you do so while the entire world watched you? Well, in today's episode, we are going to talk about a man who did exactly that. And in doing so, caused national outrage. A man who still to this very day denies the allegations, despite being both clear and obvious for all of us to see, and an incident that ended up becoming somewhat of an iceberg when it came to cheating around a certain UK game show. Major Charles Ingram was portrayed as a likeable and honourable man when taking the hot seat on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But over the course of his run on the show, the world found out that this man was actually a major fraud. And in today's episode, we are going to be spilling the beans. How his deceitful plan was hatched, who was involved, where it went wrong, and how this led to uncovering a secret society who had been scamming one of Britain's most iconic TV shows for years. This is the story of the biggest cheater in game show history. But firstly, for those of you who weren't around at the time or were living under a rock, what is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
So let me explain it, mate. We've got to go all the way back to 1996, where three blokes were sat in a room and they decided that they want to come up with a quiz show. They wanted to move the quiz show game and the format to a next level, and they wanted to give away more money than had ever been given away in game show history. Up to that date, you'd had shows like Blankety Blank, you'd had Supermarket Sweep. Do you remember all of those shows back on TV?
Blind Date.
Blind Date, you were nearly on that.
You didn't bag a money prize, but you might get a bit of muff at the end of it.
Well, ultimately, who doesn't want to win that?
There you go. Yeah. Some would say better than the million.
Some would say better. But in those shows, right, the maximum you would win was like a holiday. Yeah. Or a flat screen TV or whatever, something like that, right? But the prizes weren't that good is what I'm trying to say. But these guys had this idea where they wanted to offer a little bit more money than that. So what they did is they went to every single TV channel up and down the land, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. They shipped it across to everyone. And at the time, no one really wanted it. People were too worried about giving away £1 million. They were a little bit scared of the risk. So nothing ever came of it. But fast forward to 1998, ITV were suffering in the ratings. They were needing something, a prime show TV episode, to be able to propel them into the 21st century. And what did they decide to do? They decided to commission Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And they fronted it with a radio host who had history really in producing quiz shows. That guy was Chris Tarrant. He was the perfect man to take the throne on for this show. Ultimately, really became the face of the show, didn't he? When you think of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you think Chris Tarrant.
It was all about the Tarrant dog.
It should have been called The Tarrant Show.
Who wants to sit opposite Chris Tarrant?
yeah.
And by the way, you could win £1 million. By the way, I haven't even prepped you on this, so sorry, but I know you're the smart one out of the two of us.
Yeah.
1998, right? Because I know, like, you know, inflation with house prices and whatever. What would it be the equivalent to winning nowadays? Would it be the equivalent to winning like 5 million?
I think if you, based on football analogies, right, I'm trying to think of like Andrei Shevchenko and how much he was. When we signed him, what year was that? Was that about
2006?
2006. Okay. Well, people say that that's worth 200 million in today's money.
And so we signed him for what, 30 million, I think?
I think it was about 40, 50 in the end.
Okay, right.
30, 40 maybe. Yeah. So yeah, that was roughly about 200 million. So times it by, 5. You got the maths right. You know what you're talking about.
There you go. There you go. Not just a pretty face. So realistically, it should now be Who Wants to Be a Multi-Millionaire. But they've just stuck with the same format and, you know.
I mean, it doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it?
No.
So let me quickly explain to people who haven't seen the show how it works. There are 15 total questions. There are 5 piss easy ones at the start. When you answer those correctly, which most people do, there have been a few instances where that hasn't happened. If you answer 5 questions right, you get to £1,000. Then there are a few more questions until you get to £32,000, 5 more to be precise. And you get to that point, then you can get the chance to get to £1 million. Your last safe point is 32. So if you answer a question on £500,000 and you get it wrong, you go all the way back to £32,000. The drama involved in this show, the controversies, the way that people were so desperate to win this money, achieved so much public consciousness, mate, that hundreds of thousands of people were applying to be on this show. And one man in particular applied for this show, and his name was Charles Ingram.
Actually, Josh, Major Charles Ingram, because this man was a former army major. He had 2 degrees. I've got no degrees, so obviously he was a very smart guy, but I'm going to put it out there. I would say I'm probably smarter than Charles Ingram. Like, being completely honest though, right? He came across as thick as shit to me, to be honest.
What did Chris Tarrant describe him as?
Tim Nice but dim.
That's not a good way to introduce someone, is it?
I mean, I like Tim Nice but dim. Tim Nice but dim was a brilliant character on a terrific little TV show. But if you're applying for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which he did, by the way, over 300 times, he was calling that hotline like it was going out of fashion. And in September 2001, he finally gets through. But you don't just get to go in the chair. You got to go on the whole fastest finger thing, haven't you? And he eventually wins the fastest finger, which puts him into the chair. Anyway, Charles Ingram gets in the hot seat, and after a very turbulent time with a lot of confusing moments that spread over a couple of shows, he eventually wins the ultimate prize, becoming a millionaire, becoming the 3rd person to win it after Judith Keppel and David Edwards had already won the millionaire prize. But he wasn't only the 3rd person to win the show, he was actually the 3rd person in his family to appear on the show, wasn't he?
This is where we get into the family, mate. And this is absolutely ridiculous when you know the context behind this. Because I think when I first heard about this story, all you really hear about is the deceit of Charles. But really, there is so much behind it. And let me explain it very quickly now. We've got to go, first of all, to meet and to hear about a man called Adrian. Adrian sounds like a boring name, but it's actually quite an exciting story. Adrian had applied for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire a similar amount of times to Charles. Over 300 times he applied to be on the show. And guess what? He was on the show 4 times.
Little bit obsessive, I would say.
Completely
because,
obsessive.
do you know what I'm saying? If I didn't get a response and texted a bird 300 times, I don't think I'm then getting to take her out on a date. So the fact that he was able to get on the show after that is somewhat impressive, to be honest.
How many times have you texted a girl without a reply? Be honest.
Today,
Yeah.
6, 7 tops.
And is that good love advice? Is that a good sort of, flirting advice, would you say?
Can I phone a friend?
Yeah. Well, Adrian might be the one you should talk to be fair. So Adrian had a love affair with quiz shows, and I think he was, as Joey says, completely obsessed with this format. And what he'd done is he'd gamed the system. So what he'd realised is that the premium rate phone lines, which people dialed up, which is really how Who Wants to Be a Millionaire made all of its money, by the way. A lot of people think it was advertising, but it was actually the premium rate hotlines that, as I say, hundreds of thousands of people called up. As soon as there'd be an ad for it to say, apply for the show, you're already too late. Everyone would be dialing up at that point. There's no chance of you getting on the show.
Wait, so you had to pay to call this line?
You had to pay, I think it was £2 or £3 a minute.
What, the starting price is 500 quid?
The first price is £100.
First price is £100. So you need to answer a couple of questions, right? If you're an Adrian or if you're Charles Ingram, to have even made your money back on how much you fucking spent on applying for it,
to
didn't
even
you?
break even. I mean, arguably, you have to get to about £1,000 to even break even.
Fuck me.
Yeah, it's a scary time. So he had identified this technique, and what he also did, mate, is he had a brother called Marcus who was an engineer by trade, and he built a fastest finger first device. So when you go on the show, you have to qualify for.
He built a fingering device.
He built a very sophisticated fingering device for only £6. Pretty cheap.
That's pretty cheap.
Pretty cheap. And what he would do is he would sit there in his little shed and he'd practice fingering away as fast as he could.
Yeah.
And he managed to get pretty good at it, Joey. And the level of goodness he would still be underneath what Joey would be in terms of his fingering.
Fingering ability, yeah. Fastest finger, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I don't know what you lot think. You've got sick minds, you lot have.
So he gets on the show at the 4th time of asking. Chris Tarrant even calls this out on the show as he's walking out.
Now, you might recognise Adrian. I don't know what the odds are against this. They must actually be astronomical, but it is his 4th time on the show since September 1998, but it's the first time he's ever finally managed to get in the hot seat. Everyone had lost all hope of Adrian ever getting this far.
And when he did get on the show, he ended up leaving with £32,000, which is a very respectable amount of money, and definitely earned his money back on the premium rate phone lines.
Yep.
But that's not where the story ends, because it wasn't just Adrian Pollock that went on the show. It was also Diana, his sister. And we have to explain the connection between Diana and Charles. Diana is afterwards Charles's wife.
Yeah.
So not only was his brother-in-law on the show, but also his partner was also on the show. She managed to get up to also £32,000. She actually tried to answer the £64,000 question with one lifeline. By the way, she still had phone a friend in her back pocket. She didn't even get to use it because she answered incorrectly.
What a fucking idiot.
Idiots.
Do you know what's just like dawning on me as you're saying this?
Go on.
Diana and Charles.
There you go. It's beautiful. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be, but also didn't end well.
Did it?
Is what I'm saying.
Okay, fair enough. It was prophetic, is what you're trying to say.
Pathetic.
No, prophetic.
Right.
Different words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, tell us a little bit more about Diana.
Yeah, so Diana was definitely still obsessed with this show in the same way that the Charles and Adrian and Marcus were as well.
Not only that, from the body language and stuff like that, you'll see when Charles ended up getting on the show, I would say that Diana very much wore the trousers in that relationship, didn't she?
Diana wore the trousers, and also she didn't take losing very well.
No.
I'll say that. And also, Chris Tarrant says a very funny anecdote in which after the show they went to the bar in which Diana won her £32,000, and he says she was fuming. She was really annoyed about. She said only £32,000. You know, because that's not a load of money.
Find that down the back of the sofa, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. But the story doesn't end there with people in relation to this story, because after Adrian and Diana had been on the show, they obviously developed a sort of a strategy and a plan how to get on it. So they actually started writing a manuscript for a book, which was never released because of the incidents that we're going to talk about very soon. But that's how seriously they took it. Now, there's one other person that we need to mention here in the story. It's a man called Tecwen Whittock.
Now, I'm just going to put it out there now. With a name like Tecwen Whittock, you should be winning Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You just don't get roadmen called Tecwen Whittock, do you? You don't get chavs called Tecwen Whittock. You don't get anyone but someone that should be winning that sort of game show.
No, really, we're talking Mensa members. We're talking a guy that's intelligent. In fact, he was a college lecturer, so you would think he's a pretty smart guy. He's teaching people for a living. He knows what he's talking about.
Don't know about that.
But Joey's all about street smarts.
Teachers teach you how to be stupid.
But Tecwen had been on other shows. He'd been on 15 to 1. He'd been on...
To Catch a Predator.
He'd been on To Catch a Predator. He'd been on...
No, he hadn't really.
He'd been on The People Versus, and he'd been on a show called Beat the Bomb, which was actually Chris Tarrant's radio show, which is an interesting one.
Quality.
But Tecwen then goes on from his show fame, and he actually introduces himself to Adrian and the family and says, can you help me get on the show, for one, but also two, actually be successful in the show? And Adrian is so, I sort of say, enamored with the show. He takes this on with flying colours. He calls Tecwen over 27 times and even goes to his house to help him get on the show. And that is really where we have the full cast of characters. Now, before we go into Charles's run on the show, there is one other thing that we need to say. Charles nearly went on the show with Diana. So the rule of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is you can't go on the show twice. But the loophole that they saw was that Diana could go on it with Charles. They got onto the Fastest Finger first. They were there in the studio together, but they never...
For the couples
version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
And he didn't finger her quick enough.
And he didn't finger her quick enough.
They didn't
finger each
They
other
didn't finger
quick
each
enough.
other quick enough. Right,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay.
And they didn't get on the show. But soon after, in September of 2001, Charles Ingram made his way onto the show, got through the Fastest Finger first round, and managed to have his time finally in the hot seat.
And I mentioned the fact that Charles seemed like a bit of a div, but actually things started quite well for him. He breezes the first 4 questions. He makes it to the safe point, we call it, which is basically meaning no matter what, you go home with a bit of cash, which is £1,000, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And obviously the whole time there is a camera in the audience stuck on Diane. So she's able to be watching Charles and whatnot, and her reactions being recorded. But actually, she didn't know she was being recorded when it wasn't going up on the screen where you can actually see it. So there'd be moments where, for example, obviously Chris Tarrant's talking to Charles and they're on the screen. Now a camera's still on Diane, but the live feed isn't on her. So she didn't know that she was being recorded in between. She just thought she was being recorded when the camera was flickering to her.
Exactly that. And what's really interesting with Diana is she looks up and she's looking up at a monitor above her, and she also looks down. And the reason why she looks down is not to look at her husband, Charles, but it's also to look at Tecwen, who was there on the second day. So we're jumping a bit ahead of ourselves, but she was looking down. But I have to say, throughout the entire time, she was either looking incredibly happy because Charles was answering his questions right, or she was looking absolutely fuming. And why don't we get into the next question?
I'll tell you when she was looking absolutely fuming, because the £2,000 question was a pop culture question to do with, at the time, one of, if not the biggest soap television shows in the UK, Coronation Street.
In Coronation Street, who is Audrey's daughter? Janice, Gail, Linda, Sally.
I really haven't got a Scoobies.
Now, you've got the audience. You can ask the audience.
Yeah, Chris, I'd like to ask the audience, please.
OK, audience, let's see if you're up on your soaps. In Coronation Street, who is Audrey's daughter?
Oh, thank you. Right.
We got there, £2,000.
Now, firstly, Josh, criminal that he doesn't even know this answer without having to use a lifeline?
He should be convicted, really, for that, shouldn't he? Let's be honest. It's ridiculous.
Everyone absolutely knows this answer.
Did you know the answer?
Of course I fucking knew the answer, mate. And I'll tell you who else knew the answer. The audience. Because I'll tell you what, it was not windy in that studio, but when asking the audience, it came back with a strong gale. It was obviously Gail Platt. Could you name any other Platts?
To be honest with you, mate, I didn't even know who Gail was. I couldn't name you any other characters in Coronation
Gail
Street.
Platt. David Platt, the young girl Platt who got pregnant young, the random fella that drove them into a fucking pond one day.
Isn't David Platt a footballer? Is that, are you getting confused? Isn't David Platt the footballer?
No, David Platt was a footballer, I think, but David Platt is also Gail Platt's son. But either way, we're digressing here.
He fucked up, didn't he? Because he should have been able to answer that question. And really, if you want to be pushing to get £1 million, you can't be throwing away lifelines at a £2,000 question, the 6th question in the game.
Well, speaking about throwing away lifelines, mate, the next one, the £4,000 question, he uses another lifeline where he phones a friend. And before I show you the clip, right, do you think, like, before they went on the game show, they used to have to, like, give the friend or whatever? Because I get it was quite a while ago, 2001, maybe computers weren't as popular and whatnot, but say now, for example, if you phone a friend, that friend could just be sat there and could just type it in on their iPhone and give you the answer.
I think over time this has actually changed. When at this time they had to give 5 different people that they could ring up, and the production team kept them there. They had to make sure they were constantly by phone. They weren't allowed to leave, and they were told at specific times they had to answer the phone.
Who would you call?
Who would I call? Well, you have to have 5 people, don't you?
No, but if you just had one, phone a friend, who would you call?
Who do you know the answer for yourself? Do you know?
I'd probably call you.
Seriously?
Yeah, you're probably the smartest person I know.
No, I don't think I'd be very good.
Or no, I'd call my old man.
Would you?
Yeah, I'll call my dad.
He would have knowledge, but then if it was a pop culture question that you didn't know, he'd be in trouble, wouldn't
I don't know, he's pretty pop culture.
I had an old work colleague that was like one of those pub quiz experts, would always do it.
Work colleague, eh?
Everyone always needs one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an old bloke called Steve. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, okay, well, there you go. Maybe I'd make your top 5. If I make your top 5, that's brilliant. And do you know what? You would be in my 5.
Thank you.
Do you know why?
Why?
Any boxing-related questions.
There you go. There you go. Well,
and
anyway.
Also any Geordie Shore questions.
There you go. He called Gerald from South Wales.
Gerald, hi. The River Foyle is found in which part of the United Kingdom? England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, or Wales?
Northern Ireland.
How certain are you?
I said sort of 99% certain. Being on the end of a phone for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
I know the feeling.
That was your confidence a bit. I am 99% certain.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you.
Cheers.
Do you think Gerald was his real name? Because I don't rate that this guy was a real person. I think this was Adrian, actually Adrian was there. I reckon it was someone he knew.
Yeah, going on the consistency of, how the show went, probably Gerald never existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's be honest. Either way, he gets the question right. The klaxon then goes, which means it is the end of filming, and that means that Charles Ingram will have to come back the next day. And Chris Tarrant, by the way, was not too convinced that his run the next day would last too long.
Floundered through, but I think he had one lifeline left. And I remember us saying, God, that poor bloody Major, you know, he's got as much chance of getting the 32,000, you know, as going to the moon in a rocket. I mean, there was just no way this guy could possibly go much further.
But as you can see from that, not only was Chris Tarrant not too confident in Charles Ingram's ability on the show, neither was his wife Diana, because when they drove home, they had a bit of a row in the car, didn't they?
They did. On the way back on the M4, they had a falling out. And the reason why they had a falling out is because Diana was taking it pretty seriously. I think you could tell by her body language on the show. She's quite a serious person. And I think even during the episode filming of Charles, you could see that she was fuming at some of his reasoning, rationale, his actual performance. The fact that he'd used 2 lifelines, she was just ridiculous. And she was actually thinking this is her one big chance to have £1 million in her hand, sort of slipping away. You know, really, as Chris Tarrant said, no one expected this guy to get anything.
Mate, 2 lifelines down before you've even got the chance to win 8 grand pretty much spells the end, doesn't it? You are not going to win the Millionaire prize, are
No,
you?
Tarrant thought it, the production staff thought it, Diana obviously thought it, and to be fair, probably Charles thought it as well. So they devised a little plan. What they decided to do was call up their friend, the guy that we mentioned earlier on, our favourite name of the entire show, Tecwen.
The tech dog.
The tech man. And they called him up because they knew that Tecwen was going to be appearing on the next day's filming. He wasn't there for the first day, but he was appearing in the next day as one of the Fastest Finger First contestants, one of the hopefuls that would come onto the show. So they knew that they would have Diana in the studio, Tecwen in the studio, and also Adrian, was the brother, was also still in the studio.
I'm surprised Tecwen was able to go on the next day, because he was ill, wasn't he?
Oh God, yeah, he was seriously unwell.
I thought he sounded like he had a bit of a nasty cough to me.
Oh God, he had a serious chest infection that didn't happen to show its face the day before. On the phone call, no coughs from Tecwen.
No.
Nothing.
On the pre-rehearsals, no coughs at all from Tecwen, according to Chris Tarrant. And after they wrapped the show, when Charles Ingram went on to win, no coughs at all from Tecwen Whittock. But let's speak about the second day.
The next day, Charles is back in the hot seat. Tecwen is on the floor as a fastest finger first. That's always a bit of a tongue twister. Fastest fingers first contestant.
Yep.
And Charles has devised a new strategy. Which basically Joey has summarised quite well. So we get straight into the £8,000 question, and I'll just let you hear this straight up.
I would have thought that it would be Aristotle Onassis.
Why?
Did you hear that?
I definitely heard something coming from the audience. It sounded a little bit like a cough.
It could be a coincidence. Let's talk about the next question, which I believe is the 16,000 question, is it?
Yes, it is indeed.
It's the 16,000 question, and it's obviously a question surrounding cheese. Who doesn't like a good bit of cheese, right? And actually, Charles Ingram is pretty confident that he's got the answer to this one. But again, we do hear some noises from the audience.
There's some little noises, but you'd expect Charles to know this.
I think it's Switzerland.
You got a 50-50, that helps.
It could be France, I suppose. Then again, it could be Italy, so... or maybe it's the Netherlands.
Right. Yes. That's sort of how the question works, Charles.
No, I know. I'll go Switzerland. Yeah, Switzerland.
Final answer.
Yeah, final answer.
I don't know what your strategy and sub-strategy is, but it's working. You've just got £16,000.
So this is the crunch point, because this is where he can win £32,000 and at least level the amount of money that his missus won when she went on the show. And for me, I actually thought that this was the easiest question of the whole run, but maybe that's just because of my age and whatnot. And it was basically, who had the hit album Born to Do It? And one of the options was A1, who Charles Ingram had apparently heard of. One of the options was Craig David. There was a few more on there, but this is where things started to really unfold for me, because Charles Ingram admits to have never heard of Craig David, doesn't he?
There's a few things going on. Obviously, he says that he never heard of Craig David. The second thing is he's very sure, well, seemingly gets the answer that he thinks it's A1. The third thing is that at this point, he's kind of done this a couple of times earlier on, but he's reading every single answer out, and he's doing it again and again and again. Yeah. And Chris Tarrant even goes at one point, he sort of goes, this is kind of how the quiz works, mate. Like, you don't need to keep reading out the answers.
And do you know what the problem with this question was, right? The problem with this was old Tecwen Whittock. Tecwen Whittock doesn't sound like a man that listens to much Craig David.
Tecwen doesn't seem like he's a big pop culture expert in general.
Best ever Craig David song?
Gonna do it down on Sunday.
We were making love on Wednesday, and on Thursday and Friday and Saturday we chilled on Sunday.
What's that called?
On my way to see my friends, left couple blocks away from it. That's not the best Craig David song.
What was that called though?
That was 7 Days.
7 Days.
Yeah, pretty easy. Fucking hell. You wouldn't do good on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Don't know that. No, but on Born to Do It, there's a better song, Rendezvous.
Oh,
Rendezvous,
yes.
where to my place, say to, we could do anything. Tecwen, if you're out there, come over, mate. Come round my house. We'll stick on a bit of Craig David. We could have a few edibles or something. We'll just chill out, see what happens.
Yeah, whack on the CD.
Yeah. But either way, right, there is someone that does know the answer to this question.
Belatedly, definitely divulges she knows the answer because Diana is sat up in the studio audience. The cameras are on her intermittently. She's looking incredibly annoyed. She looks down at Tecwen. Tecwen is not doing anything. She knows that in this moment she's going to have to do something or Charles is going to answer A1 and the whole thing is fucked.
But before that, he uses the lifeline, doesn't he? He
does.
uses his final lifeline. He goes 50-50. And at this point, A1, the band he's heard of, are in there as an option in the 50-50. So it's obvious that he's going to go for A1. And you can tell that Diane is absolutely fuming. And can I ask you, right, do you think it was her intention to ever join in the coffin? Or do you think she always was going to sort of pass the baton to Tecwen?
I think she didn't want to be involved in it. And
No.
I think she wanted to use Tecwen because, let's be honest, she's not an idiot. She does know that she's going to be on camera at some point and she's checking the cameras all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think she looked up, she thought, no, I'm not on camera at this moment. And she lets out a cough, mate. And it, by the way, it was several coughs and they are obvious.
A1 or Craig David. I mean, I'm 80% of the time I'm wrong when I guess, so... No, I'll go Craig David.
Final answer.
Final answer.
We'll take a break. Join us again in a couple of minutes.
Now, for anyone who didn't watch the show, what they used to do was leave you in suspense. Chris Tarrant would cut to the commercial break, which he did now. And when he did, the production team are going into meltdown because they can sense that something is not right here.
The major seemed to be struggling to answer it, and there was enough concern for production to decide that they needed to stop the recording, to rewind the tape, to look back at it.
So even at that stage, third question in, on the night, the recording is stopped because there's concerned suspicion?
Yes.
And beyond just the production team on the floor that you've just seen there, there's also a conversation going on in the production gallery where the MD of Celador, the company that created Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, is deciding whether he wants to completely cut the show. He makes a call that he wants the recording to continue. And so the show goes on. We're back to Charles Ingram in the hot seat and Chris Tarrant says this.
You just won £32,000. I have no idea how you got to choose a man with lots of money at stake who you'd never heard of.
Neither have I. I don't think I'll be doing that again.
So now we're on to the £64,000 question against all the odds. And luckily for Charles, he thinks he knows the answer to this one, which is obviously cricket. However, he still opts to use his other lifeline, which is Tecwen Whittock's coffin.
Could be any of them, really. But I think it's cricket. But I'm not sure. But the reason I think it's cricket is because I'm sure I've seen a print. It's not fair on everyone else. I'll go for cricket.
You just won £64,000. Give us that check back. Come on. Thank you.
So now we're on the £125,000 question. Charles has already got more money than both his brother-in-law and his wife. So this would be a good time to bail, but Charles presses on and he manages to pick out what he thinks is the correct answer in this question about Renaissance painters.
Have a good look at this question.
I think it was Holbein. Sure, it was Holbein.
To be fair to Charles, he did think that Holbein was the correct answer, but he does get another cough. He locks the answer in, and guess what? He's just won 125 grand with no lifelines left. He doesn't deserve to be anywhere near this, but he's done it.
So now Charles Ingram's up to £250,000, and here is the question that he's facing.
What type of garment is an Anthony Eden? Overcoat, hat, shoe, tie.
Charles Ingram's going through his usual bullshit, listing out all the options and whatnot, and at the same time as this, Tecwen Whittock is a little bit unsure, so he thinks he's being cunning and decides to ask the bloke sat next to him if he knew the answer.
Tecwen Whittock is caught on tape getting the answer from his unsuspecting neighbour.
And there you go. Now Tecwen Whittock knows that it is a hat, and therefore the coffin starts again.
I think it's a hat. I think it's one of those really sort of tall hats that sort of came into fashion, presumably when he was Prime Minister.
Final answer.
Yep, final answer.
You just won 250.
Now we go into one of the most controversial moments of this entire run so far. It's the £500,000 question.
Baron Haussmann is best known for his planning of which city?
I think it's Berlin.
Charles immediately, as you can see right there, thinks that he knows the answer. He says the answer is Berlin, which kind of makes sense, bearing in mind it's a very German name of this architect. And so it kind of makes sense. The whole audience gasp, and you can hear that in the show.
I think it's Berlin. I think.
At this point, Tarrant is clearly bantering Charles. He says that he reminds him of that A1 answer. He knows that like something, he's got this weird technique and he sort of doesn't quite understand it. Tarrant, by the way, says that he'd never heard any of the coughs, so he's none the wiser.
I'm this close to someone, I'm eyeball to eyeball. So no, I'm not aware of anything at all. And I was genuinely amazed when I came off here that there was, murmurings and suspicion that something might have happened that night that was illegal.
So then we get this.
You dropped 218,000 if you're wrong. You've got $250,000. It's your call. Take as long as you need.
I think it's Berlin.
Then there is one of the most overtly cheating moments of the entire run. There's a cough, but then there's something a lot more than that.
I think it's Berlin.
Now that is a fucking joke. Hold on. I need a rewind on that. Listen to this again. Now, was that a cough or was that a no?
I think that was the worst no I have ever heard in my entire life. It was like, even if I was trying to do this, I'd make it a little less obvious than a no.
No. No, it's the other one.
Final answer.
You thought it was Berlin, Berlin, Berlin. You changed your mind to Paris. That brought you 500,000.
Yes! So he now moves on to the £1 million question. Only 2 contestants before Charles Ingram have ever answered this question right. I don't actually know how many people have got to this question. No matter what, he will be leaving with a good lump sum of money. But again, do you know what? And I don't know whether this is a generational thing or because of my age or whatever. I thought this question was quite easy. But clearly back in the day, was Google not around in 2001?
Did you think it was easy because you'd heard Google? Or did you know the answer?
No, I think it's easy because I grew up knowing what Google was.
Yes.
And some of the younger viewers who are watching this might not even realise there was a time before Google. Mate,
Yeah.
before Google, as in the website Google, you had to go through Ask Jeeves, and there
He
were
was a nice chap, Jeeves was.
Jeeves
He always
was good.
got
Jeeves was
you
good
to
stuff.
where you needed to go.
There you go.
If you know what I mean.
There you go. But either way, he is presented with this question.
A number 1 followed by 100 zeros is known by what name?
So the sound monitors in the production studio is here. Another thing from Tecwen. He's asked the same guy if he knows the answer. And guess what? The guy does know the answer. I'll tell you who doesn't know the answer, though, is Charles. Because he's going through every single answer. He's going, oh, I think it could be an animal. Oh, I think it could be a gigabit. He doesn't have a fucking clue. He wasn't as sure as Joey Knight was that the answer was, in fact, Google. In fact, he doesn't even really mention Google at all in any sort of like certainty of knowing the answer.
I think I know. I think it's a Google. I'm going to play Google. Yeah.
Final answer.
Final answer.
You just won 1 million! You are the most amazing contestant we have ever had.
Or as you can see, it's jubilation in the studio. Everyone's celebrating. They cannot believe this miraculous win that Charles Ingram has pulled out the bag. But you can see, while everyone's clapping and applauding him, there's one man who is sat there not clapping, and that is Larry Whitehouse, sat opposite.
Well, I'm just sitting there, glaring at Tecwen Whittock, probably glaring at the Major as well. And my reaction is, I can't believe that I seem to be the only person who's witnessed what I've seen. You know, am I the only one here who's seen this? Did I really see this?
Now, I said there was jubilation, but something very strange, as well as the suspicion that the showrunners and the production team were having and whatnot, was that after they went to the changing room and Charles and Diana backstage appeared to have a blazing row. So much so that showrunners and security moved over and there was a slight window open and they noticed inside and they closed it so no one could hear them. And you can only assume now that they were arguing over the fact that we think that maybe Diana thought that he shouldn't have gone for the £1 million question, because even Chris Tarrant said after that if he had walked away with maybe the $250,000 or whatever, he probably wouldn't have even been investigated and looked into. He probably would have got away with it, wouldn't he?
He probably would have, yeah, let's be honest. Even if he just walked away with 64 grand, which is a very respectable amount of money, more than his missus and more than her brother, it would have been fine. So yeah, the fact that he won $1 million, so much more press, so much more attention. You've got to remember, this was probably the most popular show at the time on national TV. And so there was always going to be a storm around it. The fact about this, though, that's very interesting, Joey, is that this show never made it to air. And it's the context around this and the aftermath that we now have to talk about. So while this show was going on, obviously we've covered a lot of what was going on in the studio, the story of Charles, Chris Tarrant, everything like that. We've talked about the studio floor a little bit, but behind the scenes, there was a lot more going on as well. Obviously, we've said that the MD decided to allow, the MD of Celador allowed the show to continue filming. But it wasn't only the MD that was investigating it. They had got direct sound engineers and recordists in the production suite to sort of go back, look at the recording. They counted 192 individual coughs. And you might be thinking, I don't remember seeing 192 individual coughs in the sort of filming that we saw, in the episode that we saw. That's because there were only deemed to be 19 coughs that actually resulted in impacting the answers. And so that is what the team immediately honed in on. Chris Tarrant gives Charles the check, but when they come off stage, the check is removed. That's very standard procedure. It's removed. The money then is transferred to you after the fact.
And he's actually searched as well when he comes off stage, because they start to think maybe he's got a device on him or something like that. He's very willing to be searched because they don't actually know that it's come from the coffin yet. They just smell a rat. They know something's up. Now, a few days after, Charles Ingram gets a call from the team at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
I have to tell you that we have suspicions from viewing the recording of last Monday's programme and subsequently studying the tapes carefully, that there were irregularities during the taping of the show.
Oh, good Lord, no.
Because of that, I have to tell you that these suspicions have been referred to the police.
Right.
We, not for the moment, will be airing the programme or indeed authorising payment of the cheque.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I completely refute that, obviously. Good Lord, I'm absolutely gobsmacked. All right, well, thanks for letting me know.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Now, just quickly, I could be reading things wrong. Everyone reacts to stuff in different ways and whatnot. And he does say, well, I dispute that and whatnot. But that, to me, shows the signs of someone who's being very dishonest. Like, if I gave you that call and you had just won £1 million, would you not be saying to me, well, hold on, what is the accusation here? What do you think I've done? What is the irregularity or whatever it is? Like, what has happened? Because I've just legit won £1 million and you're trying to tell me you're taking it off me. But there's none of that, is there?
No, there's a lot of stuff. Like, that call was a key indicator for me that he was guilty. But let's be honest, mate. You and I, we've watched that back. It's fucking obvious, isn't it?
He so cheated. Obvious. It's so obvious.
He absolutely cheated. And not only did we think that, not only did the Celador team and the team back of house think that, but also there was a criminal element of this. Celador, the MD of Celador, did tell the police. And so, subsequent to this, there was a full-blown trial into the guilt of Charles Ingram, Diana, and Tecwen Whittock.
So that goes to trial. Obviously, they are found guilty. Despite the fact to this day, they do still plead their innocence and they are found guilty on the charge of, Josh,
procuring the execution of a valuable security by deception. It rolls off the tongue.
Rolls off the tongue easier than Asbo, really, isn't it? GBH.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
They played all of those coughs in the trial, and the jury found them guilty.
Did they get any prison time, anything like that?
They didn't. I think it was all just fines. They had to give the money back. Well, they didn't win the money, basically.
Something tells me that old Tecwen Whittock could not do a bit of bird, mate.
No,
Fuck
he could
me.
not do any time.
Oh my God.
And also,
they'd have to stick him on non-swing or something because he would not get on well, would
poor
he?
old Tecwen. But yeah, they lost all that money. They had to pay for all the lawyers. So really, they were in a bigger hole than when they started. So yeah, not a good day for Charles, Diana and Tecwen, that. But the story doesn't end there, Joey. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes than just Charles, Diana and Tecwen. We've got to talk about the Consortium. Do you know about the Consortium? Have you heard of this?
I've heard a little bit about the Consortium. Bowley, Clear Lake Capital.
Yeah, that's the
what we're on
one.
about, yeah?
Do you know what? Those are my favourite consortium actually at the moment, and they're all happy families, much
All good
like
lads.
the consortium was in the early days. This started off in 1998 when a man called Paddy Spooner decided that he wanted to chance his arm and go from what he was a sort of a part-time quiz fan. And actually, by the way, he was barred from some pub quizzes because he was just so good. That just shows you how much of a boffin this guy really was. And decided to turn pro. So what he did is he applied for multiple versions of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He went on first, the Australian version, in which he won $250,000.
All right, let's lock it in. Paddy, you won $250,000.
And then a year after he was on the Australian version, he went on the UK version. And guess what? He won 250k again. This guy absolutely knew what he was talking about. He was cool, calm and collected when he was on the show. And my God, did Chris Tarrant know it, by the way. Like, he could tell that this guy knew what he was talking about.
£500,000. Says you're coming back again.
There's always another country, Chris.
There's so many other
There's
countries.
a lot of countries out there. Just need to learn a few languages.
And then, not only did he do the UK version, but he also went on the Irish version. In this one, he only won €1,000. So he wasn't that good on the Irish one. But after that, he meets a guy called Keith Burgess. And they decide, because they couldn't be on the show, and Keith was also on the show, by the way, because they couldn't do that again, they decided that they would create this sort of like organisation that would help people, facilitate people to get on the show, first of all, by training them on how to get through the phone lines, to get through the fastest finger first round, and to actually get them competing on the show. And all they'd have to do in return, once they did get on that, is give them 25% of their total winnings. So Spooner and Burgess basically realised that because they couldn't take part in it, they could game the system and basically enable people to get on the show and just take a cut of it. So actually, it was a really interesting business move. And between 1998 and 2000, they managed to generate over £50 million worth of winnings on the show. That makes up roughly about 20% of the total winnings during that time. And that can be attributed to these guys. Now, what they always say, and they've written books about this, they've featured in television shows as well, they weren't really doing anything wrong. All they were doing was a service to help get these guys on the show. And so they were never facing a trial, they were never facing any legal changes. And in fact, the only thing that actually managed to change was because there was a round in which, within their strategy, you had to dial up and get a call back. And there was a round that they did called the stalling round, which they had to wait for the call, delay the production team, get someone to then answer it, get all the stats and facts up, be able to answer the closest to round, which is always a very difficult one, which was sort of like, how tall is Big Ben? And you had to kind of get close to. If you got within 10%, you then qualified to the next round and you would potentially get closer to being on the show. Now, the only reason why it stopped is because they stopped doing those callbacks. And so the Consortium's run ended in 2007.
So these lot cheated Who Wants to Be a Millionaire out of a lot more than Charles Ingram managed to do.
Yeah, they did. I mean,
Yeah.
look, mate, 50 million quid. It's insane.
It's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is.
And there's been like an ITV adaptation and stuff like that of all of the events now that people can go and watch if they want to watch it on the ITV player and whatnot, to do with the whole Charles Ingram saga. And there's loads of content around it on YouTube as well. But it's one that very much fascinated us. Is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire still going?
Yes, Jeremy Clarkson is now the host.
Oh, the Clark
And
dog.
the Clark dog is still doing it. And by the way,
Why is Chris Tarrant not the host?
Chris Tarrant's ended his time. He's done his time in the sun. He retired and walked off into the sunset.
What, so he was offered it, yeah?
Chris Tarrant would be offered it, yeah.
I was going to say, that would be an
just go Jeremy
absolute
Clarkson.
travesty
Yeah.
if you got Jeremy Clarkson in there over Chris Tarrant instead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't just Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that continued on. Charles Ingram continued on. he also, after this, featured on some other shows. Did
he?
you know that?
No, I didn't. No.
Well, Joey's jump in because this is fun. He also appeared on The Weakest Link, which is fine. Bit of a banter show. That was a fun show. But he also, Joey, you'll really enjoy this, appeared on Wife Swap. Do you want to have a guess who Charles swapped Diana for?
Oh.
I think if I gave you... Actually, I'll tell you this.
I'd swap Diana for anyone. Why don't we do it Weakest Link style? Why don't you give me 4 options?
Oh, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style?
Oh, yeah. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style?
I'll do what you one better. Yeah. Why don't you do this?
Yeah.
This person is related to one of the episodes that we filmed recently about other television shows that he swapped. A very controversial figure.
Is it Jade Goody?
It's Jade Goody! He wife swapped Diana for Jade Goody. Can you imagine those two together?
No, but I would way rather Jade Goody than Diana. I don't know why. Sounds bad. I don't like Diana.
No.
I think Diana gives off fucking annoying bitch vibes to me, to be honest.
Do you think that Diana put him up to it?
Yeah.
Do you think that Diana convinced him to go on the show?
Yeah. Are they still together, him and Diana?
They are still together.
Yeah.
They've got 3 lovely daughters together, very happy. They live a normal life now, although probably in a bit of debt.
Yeah.
But don't worry about that.
Daughters on OnlyFans.
Don't worry about that, because in 2003, he was also convicted of more fraud and insurance claim.
He can't fucking help himself, this fella, can he?
But yeah, that is the story of Charles Ingram, a story that I absolutely was fascinated by, and a show in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that I absolutely loved, and I thought that we had to discuss it.
Well, let us know in the comment section below what you want to see us discuss on next time's podcast. But for now, we will see you all in the next one.